So when you ended up deciding to leave the NFL, what did you do at first? Did you go right to the trading pits, or kind of what was that journey like, and what was kind of the impetus for going into that environment?
Sure. It is a very good question because I didn't leave of my own volition. They fired me. They cut me. Um, and, it was one of those deals, Pomp, where literally they come to your door, knock on the door, and say, I know I'm going to get cut tomorrow. I know I'm going to get cut. And they'd leave because they couldn't face that. And when it happened to me, I was pretty sure that I was going to be cut, but I was still in enough of denial, the river in Egypt, where I thought, well, a couple of these other guys left. Maybe they need an extra linebacker to hang around before Singletary. What if he hurts himself or whatever? He never did. The guy was like unstoppable. And that's the guy that beat me out, Mike Singletary. So he did a great job. He was very good guy too. So it would be easy to hate the guy that, that takes the job from you. But this guy was just such a good guy. You couldn't hate him. And I've always been a guy also that's pretty honest with myself as far as my abilities. So when I meet somebody who is better than me, could be in trading. I've met guys that are better than me. It could be in skiing. And it happened to be in football, and I was just like, yeah, I get it. He's better than me. And the coach was like, yeah, we're sorry. Not everybody can make it. You know how it is, John, blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, hey, man, I appreciate the opportunity. Thank you.
Yeah, that's awesome. And I mean, look, to be completely frank, right? Playing linebacker for the Chicago Bears, no matter how long it was, is one, amazing, and then two, to hang out and meet with guys like Mike Singletary and kind of all of the players that went through that organization is obviously a life experience that a lot of people won't have, right?
Yeah, I agree. And luckily, I had one bad injury in high school and nothing after that. So, I've seen guys with their shoulders cut, their knees cut, their hands. My brother Pete has broken every finger at least once and his thumbs twice. So, yeah, there's a lot of injuries and things that guys get that I luckily avoided.
Yeah, that's awesome. And so help me understand as you decide, okay, I'm going to go kind of and build a career in finance and trading. Did you already know people and kind of have a backup plan? Was it like, okay, I got cut and now all of a sudden I got to go figure this out? Like what happened kind of post getting cut from the NFL that eventually launched the career in finance?
Again, that's a great question because since my dad was a doctor and he was pretty famous, I mean, in his field, he was, like at, if not the zenith, right up there on the top of the mountain. He developed a bunch of anti-rejection drugs for people when they got transplants and things like that. So he was very famous, and he's the chief of surgery at the University of Minnesota for like 38 years. So the choices were I could go up there, but I could stay there, but I'd always be in his shadow, I thought. And no shame in that, but I wanted to kind of forge my own path. And so my agent was putting some of his representative players, because he had hockey players, skiers, baseball players, that kind of stuff. I mean, famous people like Rod Carew and Alan Page, they were his clients. So he was putting some of those guys on the trading floor because they had what he thought was necessary to be successful in trading. They were disciplined. They were excitable. They were physical. And he thought those kinds of things would make you a good trader. Now, he knew, of course, you needed to learn all the other stuff too. But if you didn't have those things, some people were putting like professional blackjack players on the floor. Because if you can count cards, you can be a pretty good trader. And I agree, that's a good skill. I knew a guy that could count 3 decks of cards, and beat you on virtually every hand. And he was banned. He had to, when he'd go to Vegas or Reno, he'd have to go in a wig and things like that. I mean, he was kicked out of more casinos, but he was not good in the pit, even though he was a good trader, because he wasn't aggressive enough. And so, like I say, my agent was looking for guys that were aggressive, that could learn the other stuff. Some of these guys were like professional chess players, grandmasters in chess. And you might imagine that you and I probably know guys, Pomp, that are like that. They tend not to be terribly aggressive. It's all up here. And so they'd put on a position and they'd walk away. And, hopefully they put on enough edge that they could make money from putting that position on. But they couldn't stand down there in the pit and grind it out like the rest of us could, because they weren't aggressive enough. It's a physical, back then anyway, it was very physical. You couldn't hit people, but you could throw elbows and things like that. People didn't want you standing in their spot. So being bigger, I'm still about 6'2" and 215. Back then I was 6'2", maybe 250. So I was a bigger guy, broader shoulders and things. So you could intimidate people. And that was very valuable in the pit.
And John, explain that a little bit more, because there's a lot of people listening who have no idea how the pits worked, especially back then. And when you're talking about it being more physical and kind of the jockeying for positions and things like that, like unpack that a little bit and explain what was happening.
Sure. Well, so you're in the trading pit, and a pit is an octagon, just like, the UFC fights in, except they have steps that go up, usually like 3 or 4 feet in the air. Each step is, let's say, 6 or 8 inches. So there might be 4 steps up, 4 steps down into the middle of the pit. And each ring, if you will, of that pit is about 18 inches wide. So you could stand on that, but it's not exactly like standing on a 2x4. There's enough room that you can kind of walk around on it, but you could also fall off of it. And, so sometimes when traders were standing in their spot, if all of a sudden a trade was happening on the other side of the pit, everybody would rush towards that side of the pit. Sold, 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 sold. And they're stumbling down the steps and things as they go over to that side of the pit. So the pits are set up so that from the top ring of the pit, you can see all the trading desks around the floor. If you're down in the middle of the pit, you can't even see out of the pit. You're just looking at guys' bellies and things like that. So the more active trader you are, you're at the top. And the less active you are, or the newer you are, you're down at the bottom. So the guys at the bottom tended to hold positions for a long time. The guys that want to buy, sell all day long, they're at the top. And the brokers want to stand next to the guy that's actively trading, because by rule, they can't trade against their own paper. So if I have an order from a customer, I'm calling that paper, I cannot take the other side of this trade. I have to open outcry it into the pit and say, 55 calls. And the pit screams back, 1 to a quarter. And I can say, I'll pay 115. And then they might say, at a quarter, at a quarter, at a quarter. And then if I can't buy them at 115 and the order is not held, meaning I can pay any price I want, I might say, 100 and 100. I bought 200. I'm out. I'm 115 bid for 200 more, or whatever. So that trade would happen with those two guys. They'd all write each other's names down on the card rather. The sellers would write down who they sold to. The buyer would write who he bought from, and then they'd turn in their cards. So all of this got processed at the end of the day when I started. Then as trading became faster and faster and faster, it eventually moved to handheld computers. Then it moved to, at almost light speed to laptops. And then you don't need traders on the floor anymore. Now you can make that market pump from New York or from Philly or from Macau. It doesn't matter. So you don't need to be in the pits anymore. So the pits went from very profitable places to be where, if there's 3,000 traders down there, they might be taking a couple $1 billion home every year. And all of a sudden, most of that gets taken by high frequency guys. And now the traders on the floor these days, if you're still on the floor, maybe you make 150,000 bucks instead of a couple million or 10 million, whatever you could make before. And you multiply that times, 2 or 3,000. So you get where, the big change came from. Now there's almost no one on trading floors. It's all by machine.